Well, the first thing you have to know is that the military is, by necessity, a specialized society separate from civilian society. Um, Justice William Rehnquist once stated that the basic difference between military and civilian society is that the primary business of the military is to fight or be ready to fight wars should the occasion arise, and that the rights of the armed forces personnel must be conditioned to meet certain overriding demands of discipline and duty. So, what does all that mean? Well, the military First Amendment rights are going to be by necessity different from the rights you as a civilian would be granted. Whereas you are mainly governed by the Constitution, those of us serving the various branches of the military are governed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, also known as the UCMJ, the directives of the directives of the Department of Defense, the regulations of our various branches of service, and the specific orders of local commanders. Yeah, it's a mouthful. But these are things that those of us who enlist are made fully aware of long before we sign the dotted line. It's not as if we're blindsided by all these rules and regulations. So, because of these necessities, the federal courts are inclined to not step on the military's toes and allow them to regulate over freedom of speech as they deem appropriate. Now, there are four main areas of expression that we can look at where the military personnel are affected differently, and they are to speak words of criticism about the military or the government, to collect signatures on a petition while on a military base, to distribute printed materials and hold public meetings on a military base, and to wear religious garb in violation of the UCMJ. So let's go over them. The criticism of the military or of government policy. A well-known case was back in 1966 during the Vietnam War when U.S. Army Captain Howard Levy got into trouble for anti-war statements that the Army claimed promoted disloyalty and disaffection among the troops, and also represented conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman. Now, both of these activities are prohibited under the UCMJ. Now, initially, the Court of Appeals reversed Captain Levy's conviction, claiming that the language of the UCMJ was unconstitutionally vague. The Supreme Court, however, reinstated the conviction and assured military authorities that they would be allowed the leeway necessary to conduct laws as they see fit. The next area, petitioning for the redress of grievances. In a nutshell, members of the military cannot petition against the military if, and that's the key word, if it violates a regulation necessary to the security of the United States. An example of this comes from the Air Force, when a captain attempted to petition against the Air Force's grooming standards. He drafted up the petition and began collecting signatures while on a military installation. He was stopped under a very lengthy regulation that I will spare you the reading of, but this was a case where the federal government stepped in and actually stopped the military from punishing the captain. The reason for this was because the regulation was a violation of Title 10 of the U.S. Code Section 1034. That guarantees the right of any person in the military to communicate with Congress. It was also a form of what you've been studying in your class called prior restraint, which was also prohibited by the First Amendment. Basically, while service members are restricted from petitioning when it affects security, we cannot be silenced for attempting to change something menial like standards on facial hair. To sum up the other areas, distributing of materials and holding meetings on a military base means that no unofficial meetings shall be allowed on a military installation without the express written consent of the base commander. Now, the reasoning behind this is to avoid situations that may be deemed as a clear and present danger to military loyalty, discipline, or morale. This is one of those older regulations that also came from the Vietnam era. Now, because there have been cases of these meetings ending in violence on base, that's where you see things like this being, established. While this is a form of prior restraint on the military's behalf, the Court of Appeals agrees with the military standpoint and does not interfere with the regulations set. Now, the last area, wearing religious garb in violation of the UCMJ, stems from a 1981 case where an Air Force officer who was both an Orthodox Jew and an ordained rabbi was ordered not to wear his yarmulke while in uniform. Now, the officer attempted to challenge this, but was denied by the Supreme Court on the grounds that the military's needs override the desires and interests of the individual. To simplify, the military desires a uniform appearance, which is enforced by the standards and guidelines that they set forth. When you enlist, and again, this does not come as a surprise, you were told all of this ahead of time, when you enlist, you are agreeing to the guidelines and are following the codes of appearance given to you. The First Amendment does not require that the military accommodate the individual practices of appearance, as it would detract from the uniformity sought by dress regulations. Now, that doesn't mean that they hold these standards on you 24/7. This is when you are in uniform. When out of the uniform, you are welcome to wear whatever you choose, be it religious garb or other. But during duty hours, we're told what to wear, and basically we have to follow it. Again, this is something that is well known when you sign the dotted line, which is why in many cases you cannot argue or fight it, since you are signing a legally binding contract when you enlist in the military. And there you have it. Trust me, there are pages and pages of rules and regulations in this area. But that's your overall look at how the military and civilian societies differ when it comes to First Amendment rights.